Good Wednesday evening, everyone. Welcome to another study in the book of Numbers. Tonight we're going to be focusing only on number 6, and it's a little bit of a shorter chapter, comparatively speaking. But number 1, there's quite a few things in here that we're going to touch on. We're going to dig a little bit deeper on. And then the other thing is number 7 is 89 verses long. So we're probably going to save that for its own night. And we'll tackle that maybe this weekend or something. So I know that tonight is going to be an interesting night. It's one that I tend to get into quite a bit of trouble with my brothers and sisters in Christ, especially those of the ascetic persuasion. And please understand that everything that I'm saying is reasoning from Scripture. That I'm not going to any outside sources, that I am not trying to tempt anyone to do anything sinful. I'm just exploring what the Scriptures say. And if you want to discuss these things with me, then we can do so. But I'll tell you right now, the only authority I accept is the Scriptures. So if you do want to discuss these things and you start bringing a whole bunch of outside stuff, I'm just going to say I don't accept that as authoritative. So anyway, keep that in mind as we go through. We're going to be talking about the Nazarite vow tonight. And we've already talked a little bit about vows. So this is a specific one. And as a type, it's fairly interesting as well. There's some New Testament connections here that we'll be making tonight. But there's quite a bit where we read about this. It actually comes up a number of times in a number of places in a number of kind of disconnected, not fully disconnected, because nothing in the Bible is fully disconnected, but things that are not directly related to each other. So I'll mention those as they as they come up in the passage here. So anyway, Numbers chapter 6 and verse 1. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel. So this is for the children of Israel. And say unto them, When either a man or a woman shall separate themselves to a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto Jehovah, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. Now, first couple of things here. When I was growing up and the Nazarite vow was mentioned, it usually was mentioned in context with Samson or Samuel or John the Immerser or individual contexts like that or whatever. I always had it in my mind that it was only men that went under the Nazarite vow. But it clearly says, when either a man or a woman shall separate themselves. In fact, the word Nazar means to separate. It's kind of, in a lot of ways, like the word saint. Somebody who is separate and apart, somebody who is consecrated, somebody who is made holy and dedicated themselves to the Lord. So in a number of ways, the Nazarite is a type pointing to the New Testament antitype, because the Nazarite was to really separate themselves away from the pleasures of the world, some of them for a while, and not just the pleasures of the world, but also from dead things. But the idea of the Nazarite was when I read about it, when I go through these passages, I can't help but think of the idea of the saint, because the saint is supposed to separate themselves from the things of the world, that the saint is supposed to remove themselves from especially the dead, the spiritually dead, and they have dedicated their lives to God. Now, the Nazarite vow, for its purpose, was a short time. It wasn't something that they had to do forever. Whereas when you become a saint, you really are making a commitment to God for your whole life. And so and they're not directly parallel. That's not what I'm trying to say here. And I'm not saying that because a Nazarite separated themselves from these specific things, that the Christian or the saint has to separate themselves from these exact specific things as well. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there seems to be something of a parallel here between the idea of the Nazarite and the idea of the saint. So don't take it farther than what I'm actually trying to say here. Just I see the comparison between the two. So the idea of the Nazarite, the word itself means to separate, and so they were to separate themselves, dedicate themselves to Jehovah for the duration of the vow. Now, as a vow, the Nazarite vow is specific, but it comes under all of the laws pertaining to vows, generally speaking. So when we read earlier in Leviticus, where it talked about those who made a vow hastily. Well, if somebody made a Nazarite vow, but then later on they realized, a few days later, I was emotionally high and I really, really shouldn't have done that, then they can get out of the vow the same way that anybody who makes a hasty vow can get out of it. And there's other laws that we'll read about as we go through the book of Numbers and on through the rest of the Pentateuch, where there's laws pertaining to vows. And those general laws pertaining to vows also apply to the Nazarite vow. It's not a special kind of vow in the sense that it's kind of outside all of those laws. It's just another type of vow, but it was a specific one where they are to separate themselves unto Jehovah. All right, so there's three major things here that are specific to the Nazarite vow. And again, remember, these are specific to the Nazarite vow. They're not specific or directly related to the saint. That's not the point I was trying to make. It's just that there's a kind of a parallel here that is able to be made. Okay? It says, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. Now, the word for wine here is yayin, and the word for strong drink is shakar. And the normal default translation of the word yayin is alcoholic wine, especially when it's in the presence of shakar. So whenever we read about wine and strong drink, that word wine, that word yayin, means alcoholic wine. Okay? So that's when we read this, when anybody was reading this in this time period, and they heard that, if they heard Moses talking about this for the first time, he shall separate himself from yayin and shakar, they would say, oh, I can't have any beer, I can't have any wine, I can't have any alcohol. All right? And shall drink no vinegar of wine. Okay, so they can't even have the kind of the byproduct or I don't want to get into the fermentation process or whatever, but you can't have the vinegar of wine or the vinegar of shakar. So we're still dealing with the relationships to those two things, those alcoholic drinks. Neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. So they're not supposed to have anything related to grapes. All right. Now, is there anything wrong with grapes? No. Is there anything wrong with the drinking of these drinks under the Old Testament? And I'm gonna show you that there's not here in just a minute. But the idea here is that God is separating them out from these specific things that aren't necessarily wrong in and of themselves, but to focus on God by not, or kind of by giving these things up. There is a parallel to this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where it says that the man and the woman, they're not their own anymore once they're married. So the husband and wife belong to each other, and they are not to keep themselves from each other, talking about sexually, physically, except for them to focus on God for a time. And so, if the husband or the wife or both decide together, let's abstain for a day, a week, or whatever time period they decide on, they can abstain in order to remind themselves to focus themselves or refocus themselves on God. So That's not to say that the sex is bad at all, but it's to say that the time is spent away from it to focus on the more spiritual things. And so that's kind of what's happening here. And there's a little bit more to it, but I have to pause for a second, and I will be right back. Okay, a little bit of a crisis there, but nothing big. Just when you have kids, right? So we're talking about the alcohol here, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. Even the eating of grapes is talked about here. They can't have dried grapes, what we would call raisins. They can't have moist grapes. They can't have grape juice. They can't have anything. None of those things are bad. There's nothing in this context right now that we're talking about that is bad in and of itself. But it is a specific thing that they are supposed to abstain from, and they do it to remind themselves to focus on God, in the same way that husband and wife could do that, as talked about in the first few verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. But it goes on in verse 4, all the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree. Okay, so this word here is yayin in the context. The yayin tree, the wine tree, is how we would read that. And when we think of the word wine in our English, when I say the word wine, nobody thinks grape juice, unless you are just super programmed in the ascetic belief system. When I say wine, everybody immediately thinks alcohol. And so here, this word yayin, the yayin tree, the wine tree, from the kernels even to the husk, it means they couldn't have anything related to the grape, not even the plant part, the green part. Okay, now people will come here and they will say, look, this is the word yayin, and it's used in a context where it's not alcoholic. They'll say in this case, the tree itself is freshly grown. There's no fermentation, and so the word here, yayin, is used in a non-alcoholic context. That is not the case. That is not what this is doing. That's not the intent of this passage. The idea here is kind of a form of metonymy. To understand what metonymy is if when Jesus was talking about the taking of the Lord's Supper, he said, drink this cup, or whosoever drinks this cup. Well, nobody drinks a cup. You have a cup. I'm not going to drink this down. It's paper. But what it means is I'm going to drink the contents of it. And so here, the wine tree is really touching on still the alcoholic nature, but it's associating it with its ultimate source, which is the tree. And so we're not dealing with a non-alcoholic form of wine. Even when you deal with the word yayin, and it's in an obviously non-alcoholic context, that's not the normal usage of the word. It's a metaphorical use of the word, and it's extraordinary. You have to understand from context that it's not talking about alcoholic wine. Otherwise, when you deal with the word yayin, the default, the basic understanding of yayin is alcoholic wine. It's just that's what it is. And if anybody says differently, then they're trying to prove a point. They've already come to a conclusion that alcohol is bad. You shouldn't drink alcohol at all, or whatever. And that's what they're going to read into the text because of that preconceived notion. Now, I've already shown you that every case, and you can look through, just look up the word shakar all the way through the Old Testament. Shakar is always alcoholic. There's no instance of non-alcoholic shakar. It's strong drink. Nobody has strong grape juice. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? When you look up shakar, every time you see wine next to it, yayin, it's alcoholic in nature. So when we come to, and again, this is one of those things I should have looked up beforehand, but it just occurred to me to actually show this passage because we're going to come to it eventually anyway. Oops, I wanted to do the whole chapter. I don't know why. I just typed in the one verse. You know what? Let's do it this way. So in Deuteronomy 14, you have God giving command about coming to celebrate the feast days. And they're supposed to come to where the tabernacle is. Later it's the temple, of course. So we're talking about coming to Jerusalem. And so he says that when you come there, you shall eat before Jehovah your God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there. Talking about Jerusalem, the temple. The tithe of your corn, of your wine, of your oil, and the firstlings of your herds and of your flocks, that you may learn to fear Jehovah your God always. So here's wine, but a lot of people are going to say, well, that's just grape juice. Okay? But listen, and if the way be too long for you, so that you are not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from you, which Jehovah your God shall choose to set his name there, when Jehovah your God has blessed you, in other words, you can't bring it all because it's going to go bad by the time you get there, then shall you turn it into money and bind up the money in your hand. So they're going to set aside this money so that they can use it when they get there to do the things that they should have done, that they should have brought with them. And shall go into the place where Jehovah your God shall choose, and you shall bestow the money for whatsoever your soul desires. King James says lusts after, but it's just desire. For ox, or for sheep, or for wine, or strong drink, or for whatsoever your soul desires, and you shall eat there before Jehovah your God, and shall rejoice, you and your household. So they're going to go for these feast days, and God says, well, if it's too long of a journey, you're too far away, then sell what you were going to bring the money, and then buy it when you get there. Whatever your soul desires to celebrate with. And then he lists alcohol. Wine and strong drink in verse 26. It's obviously alcohol, and there's no way around it. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the drinking of alcohol, at least under the Old Testament. And there's more verses. I'm not trying to turn this into a whole thing about alcohol, but because this comes up so much with the Nazarite vow, then it's important to cover that the way that this is presented here with the Nazarite vow is that it's an unusual instance where we're talking about everything from the very beginning of the production of wine. But look what he starts with. He shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. That's the if you think about diagramming a sentence or whatever, this is the exact subject of the sentence, the whole purpose of the sentence. And then everything that comes after that is kind of like an adjective. So God says you're going to abstain for a little while from alcoholic drinks. And everything that is a part of that or leads up to it or is in any way connected to the alcoholic drinks. But the central theme is the alcoholic drinks, if that makes sense. I hope it does. Okay, so all the days of his separation, of course this is for women too, shall he eat nothing that is made of the yayin tree, the wine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. Now also, I want to note here, the use of the male pronoun here, he, himself, him, his, all of that. But note, either a man or a woman. There's a lot of times where we read of commands that are given, and it really talks in those male pronouns, and it seems as if only males were under the law. But really, it's all of these laws are general unless the context demands a separation, that there's something that was true for males versus females. And generally what it is they'll mention specific laws for females, like if they were going to get married or if they're caught with another man or something, that like there's a specific thing that lets us know that, hey, we're talking about specific things for the separate genders. But for the general idea of the laws that God is giving down, when there isn't a reason to think, like, when we talk about priesthood and the sons of Aaron, those are obviously male. Those are leadership roles, and the authority was vested into the male, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Those are obviously for just males. But a lot of the law is talking about the sin offerings and the burnt offerings and all of them. When somebody trespasses, when somebody vows a vow, when somebody's got leprosy, we don't just kick the leprous men out of the camp. Anybody who has leprosy got kicked out of the camp. So a lot of these generic laws are both male and female. Okay, so the Nazarite, when the person wanted to vow a vow of separation to dedicate themselves to Jehovah, they were not allowed to touch alcoholic wine or strong drink or anything related to them. It says, all the days of the vow of his separation shall no razor come upon his head until the days be fulfilled in which he separates himself unto Jehovah. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. Now, there's an interesting understanding here that informs something in the New Testament. So this is, understand this is a holy vow. This person is separating themselves for a time to dedicate themselves even more to Jehovah than they normally do. And whether it's for 30 days or 60 days or a year or however long they do it, they are separating themselves, and God is considering them kind of extra sanctified. And then you get over to 1 Corinthians 11, another one of the ones I should have brought up, and you have a point of contention for a lot of people. And as you have seen in some of my earlier videos, and probably will see in some of my later videos, I sometimes will let my hair grow out. Okay? Well, people who don't know any better, who don't understand the whole of the Bible, they'll come here to where Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, and they'll talk about these first few verses here in 1 Corinthians 11. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, the head of Christ is God. So we're speaking about the chain of command here, the authority. And then he says, every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaved. Okay, so where does this idea of honor and dishonor come in, talking about your head covering, either wearing a hat or having long hair? For if the woman be not covered, let her also be shaved. In other words, if you don't have your head covered, you might as well just shave your head. The reason they talk about this is because that's what the prostitutes did in that time. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. So here's a conditional. If it be a shame. Well, why is it a conditional? Well, this is something that is particular to what's going on. Corinth is a Gentile congregation. Corinth is in the midst of those Greek pagan temples, and the prostitutes tended to have their head shaved. So this is about avoiding the being associated with idolatrous worship. And we're going to see that here in just a second. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head. Let's talk about let his hair grow long. For as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the messengers. Okay, all of this, every bit of this, is dealing with the idea of the traditions surrounding being the Greek temples and the vestigial virgins and all of the things that were going on with the professional prostitutes in the temples and all of that. Now, all the way down to verse 14, because I want to get to the point, because this is a lesson on number 6, not 1 Corinthians 11. Doth even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? Nature itself teach you. Well, where in the world does nature teach you that it's shameful for a man to have long hair? Because if it was a natural thing, because we can go to Romans 1 and we can talk about people doing things that were unnatural, men with men, women with women, that kind of stuff. That's unnatural. But where does nature teach that it's unnatural for a man to have long hair? It doesn't. Nowhere in the Bible can you find this anywhere. But if you go back to Numbers chapter 6, the Nazarites were not supposed to cut their hair. They were considered under this extra vow of holiness and separation for the purpose of being closer to God. by letting their hair grow long. And you think Paul, writing this letter, didn't know about the Nazarite vow? He was the most educated and learned of all the apostles. He was taught at the feet of Gamaliel. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. You don't think he knew about the Nazarite vow? But if any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. So all of this word custom is very important here. This word custom covers all of this. Starting in verse 4, they're talking about the reflection or the association of these pagan institutions. Paul is saying, don't be like them. Don't associate yourselves with them. Don't practice what they practice to be like them. Just like when we get into Acts 15 and the things that they were supposed to abstain from, the things offered to idols. Romans 14, eating the meat offered to idols. A lot of what was associated with abstaining from these things, or the practices, were to keep them from being pulled back into that pagan idolatry that a lot of these Gentiles were coming up out of. But Paul relegates all of this about the covering of the head to a custom. He says it's a thing that some people practice, but if anybody's going to fight about it, if somebody's going to have a problem with it, why would there be a contention? Well, if you've got a Jew or somebody who was raised a Jew who knew about the Nazarite vow, may have even participated in the Nazarite vow, they might have long hair or have known to have had long hair at some time. And they aren't going to have any problems with hair length being Jewish, because for them, it was actually a sign of holiness. But for the Gentiles, for the Greeks, it was problematic because of the idol worship. And so Paul says, if anyone's going to be contentious, if you're going to cause problems with it, if you're going to stir up things, Paul, speaking by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, say, we don't have a custom of covering and uncovering heads. That's not what we're talking about here. Neither the churches of God. We don't do that. Don't fight about this. And so this is basically a Romans 14 issue is what it boils down to. Is one of those things is don't associate yourself with the pagan idols, don't associate yourself with the pagan worship and the vestigial virgins and the prostitutes and all that kind of stuff. Don't do that. Don't participate in those things if it's going to draw you back into it. But we don't actually have customs surrounding the hair length. We don't even have a Nazarite vow. We don't have a custom in the churches of God that say, hey, if you want to be closer to God and feel more sanctified and dedicate yourself to Him a little bit more, then take the Nazarite vow and let your hair grow long. We don't have a custom like that. There's nothing in the New Testament that requires us to do that. But neither is anything in nature that teaches us that men having long hair is wrong. That's not what this verse is saying. Paul is being sarcastic here in that he's asking a rhetorical question, because it is very, very obvious that nature teaches you no such thing. He's hearkening to the thought of the Greeks of that day. That's where he's getting this from. This is where the rhetorical question comes from, is it all centers around that pagan worship. So anyway, that's another thing I wanted to delve into here with number 6, because so many things come from this Nazarite vow to deal with they want to dissect the Nazarite vow for whatever pet reason they have, to say, well, look, the Nazarite vow, you couldn't do it, and so we can't do it as Christians. And they're totally misunderstanding. In fact, they're doing exactly the opposite of what they should be doing with this chapter. They are understanding it backwards. And so it doesn't work. It doesn't work for alcohol. It doesn't work for the long hair thing. And so It's just problematic for anybody who tries to come to the Nazarite vow for their pet doctrine. Okay. And then the last little stipulation for the Nazarite vow, verse 6, all the days that he separates himself unto Jehovah, he shall come at no dead body. He can't touch a dead body of any kind. I'm talking about like animal life or human life. Obviously, he can touch dead plants because he has to eat. He shall not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, or for his brother, or for his sister when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. So if you're under the Nazarite vow and you have a family member that dies, you don't get to be a pallbearer. You don't get to be somebody who touches them and cares for the body and entombs them or does anything related to touching of the body. You can't do it because it is more important that you observe your vow to God than for you to bury the dead corpse of your family member. That's very, very clear here in this passage. All the days of his separation he is holy unto Jehovah. Now, does that mean that anybody who wasn't a Nazarite is unholy to God? No, that's not what this is saying. It's saying that they have set apart a time in their life where they are going to focus very clearly and specifically on serving Jehovah. Okay, my hair is long, my hair is getting long, and it's helping me to remember I am focused on Jehovah. And they set aside the cares of the world. They set aside the cares of burying their family members. That's how much the world doesn't mean anything to them during this vow. And so it's just a time of extra dedication. Okay? And if any man die very suddenly by him, and he hath defiled the head of his consecration, then he shall shave his head in the day of his cleansing. On the seventh day he shall he shave it. Okay? So, this is kind of an accidental touching. If somebody dies next to him, like maybe he has a heart attack or something and falls into him, he's dead, you catch him or whatever and you didn't know, then you've defiled yourself, ritually speaking, and you have to shave your head, and then you basically have to start over, is what this is going to say. And on the eighth day he shall bring 2 turtles or 2 young pigeons to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall offer the one for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering, and make an atonement for him, for he has sinned by the dead. This is a ritualistic thing here. And shall hallow his head that same day. And he shall consecrate unto Jehovah the days of his separation, and shall bring a lamb of the first year for a trespass offering. But the days that were before shall be lost, because his separation was defiled. So he's got to start all over. That doesn't mean that he was a bad person. Doesn't mean that he did anything necessarily wrong. But because of the idea of the ritual and the lessons that are taught through these things, he is ritualistically defiled and unclean, and so he has to make all of these offerings and then start his vow over. Okay? All right, verse 13. And this is the law of the Nazarite. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, he shall be brought unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and he shall offer his offering unto Jehovah, one he lamb of the first year without blemish for a burnt offering, and 1 ewe lamb of the first year without blemish for a sin offering, and 1 ram without blemish for peace offerings. Remember, there's 5 different types of offering, or 4 different types of offerings, and so they've got there's 5, and they have to offer several of these. So they're going to do a burnt offering, and then they're going to do a sin offering, and then they're going to do a peace offering, and they're not going to do the other 2. And a basket of unleavened bread, cakes of fine flour. So that's kind of like the meal offering that we talked about. The basket of unleavened bread, cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, and wafers of unleavened bread anointed with oil, and their meal offering and their drink offerings. Okay, so again, there's the 4th kind. And the priest shall bring them before Jehovah, and shall offer his sin offering and his burnt offering. Okay, so he has to. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a very special vow. There's a lot of ceremony that comes, and when you have finished it, what you're doing is you're completing your dedication to God. Now, during this period, it was a time when you were focused on doing righteousness, like above and beyond your normal life. You're really, really focused on God, like just super holy. That's what you're supposed to be doing. So why is he offering all of this stuff? because part of the focus of the Old Testament of the Israelite was to understand that of themselves they could not be righteous. Even with this Nazarite vow, they could not be righteous once they sinned. That their holiness was something that was attributed to them, was credited to them on the premise that eventually Messiah was going to come and really pay that debt. And so even after this holy time period where they have separated themselves and really focused on God, they come and they offer all these offerings to continually remind themselves that they are lost in their sins and that their only hope is in the final full purpose of Israel. And most people miss that purpose. If you ask anybody today, why was Israel chosen by God? They will not answer that question correctly. They'll say, well, I heard one person answer that, well, they were the purest of the line of Adam. You know, you talk about Adam, and then you had Seth, and then you had Enoch and Methuselah, and then eventually Noah, and then Noah had Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and so from Shem was the purest of the Adamic line, and then after Shem you had some branching off and some entering marrying, but when you get to Abraham you still have purity there, and there's all this purity about the blood and the bloodlines and the genetic heritage and all of that, and then Isaac and then Jacob, and they get so embroiled in the physicality of the bloodlines, and so they say Israel was chosen because they were better. They were purer. Well, that's nonsense. In fact, that's the opposite of what's true. God chose them because they were weak and small, and they in and of themselves were not anything to look at. They were shorter and weaker than all the surrounding nations. I mean, look at Israel going up against the Philistines and Goliath. And it was because they were weak that God could show his glory to the world. Because here you had all these weaklings running around. And on top of that, they were stiff-necked, stubborn, annoying people. And God still was able to accomplish everything that he promised through these people. So what was the purpose of Israel? The purpose of Israel, 100%, was to bring Messiah into the world. And if you think that there's any other purpose to Israel, that they somehow today are still God's chosen people, what are they chosen for? And if you can't answer that question, maybe you need to rethink your theology. And so the Nazarite, when he finishes his vow, and he's no longer separated out, he has to do all of these sacrifices because he's still lost in his sins, looking forward earnestly to the things, or to the thing that these offerings point to, which is the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate Lamb of God. And so that's the purpose of the Nazarite vow, is that focus on holiness, but also a reminder that they're lost and there's no way to save themselves. They need the Messiah. They need the Anointed One to come and give them true forgiveness of their sins. And that was it. So Nazarite vow, like everything else, points straight at Jesus. The priest shall bring them before Jehovah, and shall offer his sin offering and his burnt offering. And he shall offer the ram for a sacrifice of peace offering unto Jehovah, with the basket of unleavened bread. The priest shall offer also his meal offering and his drink offering. And the Nazarite shall shave the head of his separation at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall take the hair of the head of his separation and put it in the fire, which is under the sacrifice of the peace offering. So when he makes the peace offering, when they're going to do the peace offering on the altar, he puts the hair as part of the fire. Not on the altar, but under the altar as part of the flame. Okay, and the priest shall take the sodden shoulder of the ram and one unleavened cake out of the basket and one unleavened wafer, and shall put them upon the hands of the Nazarite after the hair of his separation is shaved. And the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before Jehovah, This is holy for the priest, with a waved breast and a heaved shoulder. After that, the Nazarite may drink wine. Okay, so the priest is going to say it's a wave offering. They would kind of wave it, and they would say, all right, this is a sacrifice. We accept this sacrifice. But actually, it goes to the priest for them to take part in. That was part of their support. And then after that, the Nazarite may drink wine. And then all the way up to the alcoholic wine. Okay, they had permission to do that after their vow. So anybody saying that under the Old Testament you couldn't drink alcoholic wine, totally missed the context of number 6. It's absolutely just bad hermeneutics when you do that. On top of that, the release into being able to drink wine also releases them, of course, into the other things. They can touch dead people. And obviously you see here that they are now allowed to cut their hair again. So all of the things were released after this offering here. This is the law of the Nazarite who hath vowed, and of his offering unto Jehovah for his separation, beside that his hand shall get, according to the vow which he vowed, so he must do after the law of his separation. Okay, so this is God saying you got to carry it all the way through, and this is what you do when you're done. And that God will accept the vow, and God will accept the extra dedication of that vow. Verse 22, and Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and unto his sons, saying, On this wise you shall bless the children of Israel, saying unto them. And this is cool because this is, when we sing a lot of our worship songs. Some of the more kind of devotionally type songs that you sing like on a Wednesday night or Bible camp or some of the other places that we, more like youth rallies or whatever. You think that a lot of these songs, which are direct quotes of Scripture, come straight out of the book of Psalms. Sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Here's one, comes right out of Numbers. Who would have thunk that the book of Numbers would contain a psalm that we sing, or a song that we sing? So God says, On this wise shall you bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, Jehovah bless you and keep you. Jehovah make his face shine upon you, and be gracious unto you. Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. What is his name? His name is Jehovah. His name is not the Lord. His name is not God. His name is Jehovah. At least in the English, or Yahweh in the Hebrew. Okay? It's very important. His name is very, very, very important. And it's one of the probably the biggest problems I have with the King James is this nonsense here, where they don't translate Yahweh, the tetragrammaton or whatever, into Jehovah, the English word Jehovah, or the English name of God. His name is important. People need to know it. They need to know who he is. And somebody says, oh God, or something like that, maybe being flippant or whatever. Which God are you talking about? Are we talking Thor? Are we talking Vishnu? Or are we talking some of the ancient Druidic gods, or maybe some of the Native American deities, or something along those lines? Quetzalcoatl or something like that? No. We talk about deity, we talk about God, but when we talk about the one true and living God, he has a name. And it says, in verse 27, they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, Jehovah, and I will bless them. Okay? So it's really cool here. So God's going to bless them and keep them. He's going to protect them. He's going to provide for them. He's going to make his face to shine upon them and be gracious unto them. He's going to offer them grace. He's going to give them grace. What is grace? Unmerited favor. He's going to give them things that they don't deserve because of their purpose, because of what he sees in them. He sees through these people his son coming into the world to save his creation, to save mankind, to lift up his countenance upon them and give them peace. God wants them to have peace. They don't have peace because they're stubborn, but that's the blessing that God wanted to give them, and through them, everybody else. See, there's a thing I heard not too long ago. A guy was talking against Calvinism, and Calvinists want to say that when God chooses people, when he elects people, that he elects them to the exclusion of everybody else. And that is not the case. When God chooses a person, or he chooses a people, which is the most often is choosing a people, a group, he chooses them or elects them or selects them or predestines them to be a blessing to everybody else. And so by God blessing and keeping Israel, by God being gracious unto Israel and giving peace or offering peace to Israel, really that's about reconciliation to him, he was able to offer that to everybody through his son, because that's the purpose of Israel. They don't have any other major purpose. That's the primary purpose. Now there's other things that they did as corollaries to that, but the primary purpose of Israel was to bring Messiah into the world, fulfill the promise to Abraham. Did God do that? Yes. Is Israel God's chosen people anymore? No, because they aren't chosen for some weird eschatological something down the road that we're still looking forward to that nobody can define. They were chosen to bring Messiah into the world. And all of this relates to this. All of this points to Jesus. Every bit of this chapter points to Jesus because of that. But one other point to make. It has to do with another person that a lot of people claim was under the Nazarite vow, and that is John the Immerser. So Luke chapter 1 was the story of Elizabeth and Zacharias and John being named and born and all of that. Okay, so in talking about John, verse 13 says the angel is talking to Zechariah. And then in verse 15 it says, "For he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink." So that's in the Greek, that's oinos and sikar. And sikar is not very used very much in the New Testament. But oinos is just like yayin. It's translated wine, and the default understanding of oinos is alcoholic. But here it's used with sakar, which is shakar. The oinos and shakar, when used together, is always alcoholic. So he's not going to drink alcoholic anything, and that's all it says. It doesn't go into can't have vinegar, can't have grapes, can't have grape juice, can't eat anything off of the vine. It doesn't say any of that. But he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. And that's it. And from that tiny little phrase there, people immediately go to number 6, and they say, he can't have wine and strong drink, he must have been a Nazarite. The New Testament never says that. New Testament never comes out and it says that John was a Nazarite from birth, that he ever took the vow personally, or that there's any extra anything related to him being a Nazarite. It just says that he personally, individually, shall not drink alcoholic stuff. That's it. And there's another part that we could connect to that I'm not going to do it tonight, but go to Luke chapter 7 and you talk about what John didn't drink is what Jesus did drink. And the Bible is very specific about those things. But again, this lesson is about number 6, not about alcohol. But as far as people talking about examples of people who were under the Nazarite vow, Samson, Samuel, there's others, but John was not one of them. And you can't find that anywhere in the context of anything in the 66 books of the Bible that John the Immerser was under the Nazarite vow. It's just not in there. You have to put that into the text. And that's just as wrong as anything, putting anything else into the text. So, all right, so that's number 6. Again, I told you it was going to be kind of long, even though it's only a 27-verse chapter. There's a lot to draw out of this, a lot of things to deal with. Kind of like Yoda says, you have to unlearn what you've learned. A lot of people come here for the wrong reasons. They're trying to prove something out of this that the chapter just doesn't prove. So I thought it was necessary to unravel a little bit of that tonight. So thank you for sticking with me. And again, if you have any questions or comments, or you want to talk to me, you can talk to me in public in the comments, or you can come to me privately through Messenger or email, or however you have a way to contact me. You can ask for my phone number. We can call and talk over the phone if you want to. However you want to do that, I'm happy to talk about any of these concepts. So thank you again for watching, and we'll do Numbers chapter 7, all 89 verses, coming up very soon.